The End. They clothed me and gave me money. I knew what the money was for. It was to get me started. When it was gone, I would have to get more if I wanted to go on. The same for the shoes. When they were worn out, I would have to get them mended, or get myself another pair, or go on barefoot if I wanted to go on. The same for the coat and trousers, needless to say, with this difference, that I could go on in my shirt sleeves if I wanted. The clothes, shoes, socks, trousers, shirt, coat, hat, were not new, but the deceased must have been about my size. That is to say, he must have been a little shorter, a little thinner, for the clothes did not fit me so well in the beginning as they did at the end, the shirt especially, as it was many a long day before I could button it at the neck, or profit by the collar that went with it, or pin the tails together between my legs in the way my mother had taught me. He must have put on his Sunday best to go to the consultation, perhaps for the first time, unable to bear it any longer. Be that as it may, the hat was a bowler, in good shape. I said, "Keep your hat and give me back mine." I added, "Give me back my greatcoat." They replied that they had burnt them, together with my other clothes. I understood then that the end was near, at least fairly near. Later on, I tried to exchange this hat for a cap, or a slouch which could be pulled down over my face, but without much success. And yet I could not go about bare-headed, with my skull in the state it was. At first this hat was too small, then it got used to me. They gave me a tie, after long discussion. It seemed a pretty tie to me, but I didn't like it. When it came at last, I was too tired to send it back. But in the end, it came in useful. It was blue, with kinds of little stars. I didn't feel well, but they told me I was well enough. They didn't say in so many words that I was as well as I would ever be, but that was the implication. I lay inert on the bed, and it took 3 women to put on my trousers. They didn't seem to take much interest in my private parts, which, to tell the truth, were nothing to write home about. I didn't take much interest in them myself. But they might have passed some remark. When they had finished, I got up and finished dressing unaided. They told me to sit on the bed and wait. All the bedding had disappeared. It made me angry that they had not let me wait in the familiar bed, instead of leaving me standing in the cold, in these clothes that smelt of sulphur. I said, "You might have left me in the bed till the last moment." Men all in white came in with mallets in their hands. They dismantled the bed and took away the pieces. One of the women followed them out and came back with a chair which she set before me. I had done well to pretend I was angry, but to make it quite clear to them how angry I was that they had not left me in the bed, I gave the chair a kick that sent it flying. A man came in and made a sign to me to follow him. In the hall he gave me a paper to sign. "What's this?" I said. "A safe conduct?" "It's a receipt," he said, "for the clothes and money you have received." "What money?" I said. It was then I received the money. To think I had almost departed without a penny in my pocket. The sum was not large, compared to other sums, but to me it seemed large. I saw the familiar objects, companions of so many bearable hours. The stool, for example, dearest of all. The long afternoons together, waiting for it to be time for bed. At times I felt its wooden life invade me, till I myself became a piece of old wood. There was even a hole for my cyst. Then the window pane with the patch of frosting gone, where I used to press my eye in the hour of need, and rarely in vain. "I am greatly obliged to you," I said. "Is there a law which prevents you from throwing me out naked and penniless?" "That would damage our reputation in the long run," he replied. "Could they not possibly keep me a little longer?" I said. "I could make myself useful." "Useful?" he said. "Joking apart, you would be willing to make yourself useful?" A moment later he went on, "If they believed you were really willing to make yourself useful, they would keep you, I am sure." The number of times I had said I was going to make myself useful, I wasn't going to start that again. How weak I felt. "Perhaps," I said, "they would consent to take back the money and keep me a little longer." "This is a charitable institution," he said, "and the money is a gift you receive when you leave. When it is gone, you will have to get more, if you want to go on." Never come back here, whatever you do. You would not be let in. Don't go to any of our branches either, they would turn you away. Excellence, I cried. Come, come, he said, and anyway, no one understands a tenth of what you say. I'm so old, I said. You are not so old as all that, he said. May I stay here just a little longer, I said, till the rain is over? You may wait in the cloister, he said. The rain will go on all day. You may wait in the cloister till 6 o'clock. You will hear the bell. If anyone challenges you, you need only say you have permission to shelter in the cloister. Whose name will I give? I said. Weir, he said. I had not been long in the cloister when the rain stopped and the sun came out. It was low, and I reckoned it must be getting on for 6, considering the season. I stayed there looking through the archway at the sun as it went down behind the cloister. A man appeared and asked me what I was doing. What do you want? Were the words he used. Very friendly. I replied that I had Mr. Weir's permission to stay in the cloister till 6 o'clock. He went away, but came back immediately. He must have spoken to Mr. Weir in the interim, for he said, You must not loiter in the cloister now the rain is over. Now I was making my way through the garden. There was that strange light which follows a day of persistent rain, when the sun comes out and the sky clears too late to be of any use. The earth makes a sound as of sighs, and the last drops fall from the emptied, cloudless sky. A small boy, stretching out his hands and looking up at the blue sky, asked his mother how such a thing was possible. Fuck off, she said. I suddenly remembered I had not thought of asking Mr. Weir for a piece of bread. He would surely have given it to me. I had, as a matter of fact, thought of it during our conversation in the hall. I had said to myself, let us first finish our conversation, then I'll ask. I knew well they would not keep me. I would gladly have turned back, but I was afraid one of the guards would stop me and tell me I would never see Mr. Weir again. That might have added to my sorrow, and anyway, I never turned back on such occasions. In the street I was lost. I had not set foot in this part of the city for a long time, and it seemed greatly changed. Whole buildings had disappeared, the palings had changed position, and on all sides I saw, in great letters, the names of tradesmen I had never seen before and would have been at a loss to pronounce. There were streets where I remembered none. Some I did remember had vanished, and others had completely changed their names. The general impression was the same as before. It is true I did not know the city very well. Perhaps it was quite a different one. I did not know where I was supposed to be going. I had the great good fortune, more than once, not to be run over. My appearance still made people laugh, with that hearty, jovial laugh, so good for the health. By keeping the red part of the sky as much as possible in my right hand, I came at last to the river. Here all seemed at first sight more or less as I had left it. But if I had looked more closely, I would doubtless have discovered many changes. Indeed, I subsequently did so. But the general appearance of the river, flowing between its quays and under its bridges, had not changed. Yes, the river still gave the impression it was flowing in the wrong direction. That's all a pack of lies, I feel. My bench was still there. It was shaped to fit the curves of the seated body. It stood beside a watering trough, gift of a Mrs. Maxwell to the city horses, according to the inscription. During the short time I rested there, several horses took advantage of this monument. The iron shoes approached in the jingle of the harness. Then silence. That was the horse looking at me. Then the noise of pebbles and mud that horses make when drinking. Then the silence again. That was the horse looking at me again. Then the pebbles again. Then the silence again. Till the horse had finished drinking, or the driver deemed it had drunk its fill. The horses were uneasy. Once, when the noise stopped, I turned and saw the horse looking at me. The driver, too, was looking at me. Mrs. Maxwell would have been pleased if she could have seen her trough rendering such services to the city horses. When it was night, after a tedious twilight, I took off my hat which was paining me. I longed to be under cover again, in an empty place, close and warm, with artificial light, an oil lamp for choice, with a pink shade for preference. From time to time someone would come to make sure I was all right and needed nothing. It was long since I had longed for anything, and the effect on me was horrible. In the days that followed, I visited several lodgings, without much success. They usually slammed the door in my face, even when I showed my money and offered to pay a week in advance, or even two. It was in vain I put on my best manners, smiled and spoke distinctly. They slammed the door in my face before I could even finish my little speech. It was at this time I perfected a method of doffing my hat at once courteous and discreet, neither servile nor insolent. I slipped it smartly forward, held it a second poised in such a way that the person addressed could not see my skull, then slipped it back. To do that naturally, without creating an unfavorable impression, is no easy matter. When I deemed that to tip my hat would suffice, I naturally did no more than tip it, but to tip one's hat is no easy matter either. I subsequently solved this problem, always fundamental in time of adversity, by wearing a kepi and saluting in military fashion. No, that must be wrong. I don't know. I had my hat at the end. I never made the mistake of wearing medals. Some landladies were in such need of money that they let me in immediately and showed me the room, but I couldn't come to an agreement with any of them. Finally, I found a basement. With this woman I came to an agreement at once. My oddities, that's the expression she used, did not alarm her. She nevertheless insisted on making the bed and cleaning the room once a week, instead of once a month as I requested. She told me that while she was cleaning she would not take long, I could wait in the area. She added, with a great deal of feeling, that she would never put me out in bad weather. This woman was Greek, I think, or Turkish. She never spoke about herself. I somehow got the idea she was a widow, or at least that her husband had left her. She had a strange accent, but so had I with my way of assimilating the vowels and omitting the consonants. Now I didn't know where I was. I had a vague vision, not a real vision, I didn't see anything, of a big house 6 or 5 stories high, one of a block perhaps. It was dusk when I got there, and I did not pay the same heed to my surroundings as I might have done if I had suspected they were to close about me. And by then I must have lost all hope. It is true that when I left this house it was a glorious day, but I never looked back when leaving. I must have read somewhere when I was small and still read that it is better not to look back when leaving, and yet I sometimes did, but even without looking back it seems to me I should have seen something when leaving, but there it is. All I remember is my feet emerging from my shadow, one after the other. My shoes had stiffened and the sun brought out the cracks in the leather. I was comfortable enough in this house, I must say. Apart from a few rats, I was alone in the basement. The woman did her best to respect our agreement. About noon she brought me a big tray of food and took away the tray of the previous day. At the same time she brought me a clean chamber pot. The chamber pot had a large handle which she slipped over her arm, so that both her hands were free to carry the tray. The rest of the day I saw no more of her, except sometimes when she peeped in to make sure nothing had happened to me. Fortunately, I did not need affection. From my bed I saw the feet coming and going on the sidewalk. Certain evenings, when the weather was fine and I felt equal to it, I fetched my chair into the area and sat looking up into the skirts of the women passing by. Once I sent for a crocus bulb and planted it in the dark area in an old pot. It must have been coming up to spring. It was probably not the right time for it. I left the pot outside, attached to a string I passed through the window. In the evening, when the weather was fine, a little light crept up the wall. Then I sat down beside the window and pulled on the string to keep the pot in the light and warmth. That can't have been easy. I don't see how I managed it. It was probably not the right thing for it. I manured it as best I could and pissed on it when the weather was dry. It may not have been the right thing for it. It sprouted, but never any flowers, just a wilting stem and a few chlorotic leaves. I would have liked to have a yellow crocus or a hyacinth, but there, it was not to be. She wanted to take it away, but I told her to leave it. She wanted to buy me another, but I told her I didn't want another. What lacerated me most was the din of the newspaper boys. They went pounding by every day at the same hours, their heels thudding on the sidewalk, crying the names of their papers and even the headlines. The house noises disturbed me less. A little girl, unless it was a little boy, sang every evening at the same hour, somewhere above me. For a long time I could not catch the words, but hearing them day after day, I finally managed to catch a few. Strange words for a little girl, or a little boy. Was it a song in my head, or did it merely come from without? It was a sort of lullaby, I believe. It often sent me to sleep, even me. Sometimes it was a little girl who came. She had long red hair, hanging down in 2 braids. I don't know who she was. She lingered a while in the room, then went away without a word. One day I had a visit from a policeman. He said I had to be watched, without explaining why. Suspicious, that was it. He told me I was suspicious. I let him talk. He didn't dare arrest me. Or perhaps he had a kind heart. A priest, too. One day I had a visit from a priest. I informed him I belonged to a branch of the Reformed Church. He asked me what kind of clergyman I would like to see. Yes, there's that about the Reformed Church. You're lost. It's unavoidable. Perhaps he had a kind heart. He told me to let him know if I needed a helping hand. A helping hand? He gave me his name and explained where I could reach him. I should have made a note of it. One day the woman made me an offer. She said she was in urgent need of cash and that if I could pay her 6 months in advance, she would reduce my rent by 1/4 during that period, something of that kind. This had the advantage of saving 6 weeks' rent and the disadvantage of almost exhausting my small capital. But could you call that a disadvantage? Wouldn't I stay on in any case till my last penny was gone, and even longer, till she put me out? I gave her the money and she gave me a receipt. One morning, not long after this transaction, I was awakened by a man shaking my shoulder. It could not have been much past 11. He requested me to get up and leave his house immediately. He was most correct, I must say. His surprise, he said, was no less than mine. It was his house, his property. The Turkish woman had left the day before. But I saw her last night, I said. You must be mistaken, he said, for she brought the keys to my office no later than yesterday afternoon. But I just paid her 6 months' rent in advance, I said. Get a refund, he said. But I don't even know her name, I said, let alone her address. You don't know her name, he said. He must have thought I was lying. I'm sick, I said. I can't leave like this, without any notice. You're not so sick as all that, he said. He offered to send for a taxi, even an ambulance if I preferred. He said he needed the room immediately for his pig, which even as he spoke was catching cold in a cart before the door, and no one to look after him but a stray urchin, whom he had never set eyes on before, and who was probably busy tormenting him. I asked if he couldn't let me have another place, any old corner where I could lie down long enough to recover from the shock and decide what to do. He said he could not. Don't think I'm being unkind, he added. I could live here with the pig, I said. I'd look after him. The long months of peace wiped out in an instant. Come now, he said. Get a grip on yourself. Be a man. Get up. That's enough. After all, it was no concern of his. He had really been most patient. He must have visited the basement while I was sleeping. I felt weak. Perhaps I was. I stumbled in the blinding light. A bus took me into the country. I sat down in a field in the sun. But it seems to me that was much later. I stuck leaves under my hat all the way round to make a shade. The night was cold. I wandered for hours in the fields. At last I found a heap of dung. The next day I started back to the city. They made me get off 3 buses. I sat down by the roadside and dried my clothes in the sun. I enjoyed doing that. I said to myself, there's nothing more to be done now, not a thing till they are dry. When they were dry I brushed them with a brush, I think a kind of currycomb that I found in a stable. Stables have always been my salvation. Then I went to the house and begged a glass of milk and a slice of bread and butter. They gave me everything except the butter. May I rest in the stable, I said. No, they said. I shall stink, but with a stink that pleased me. I much preferred it to my own, which moreover it prevented me from smelling, except a waft now and then. In the days that followed I took the necessary steps to recover my money. I don't know exactly what happened, whether I couldn't find the address, or whether there was no such address, or whether the Greek woman was unknown there. I ransacked my pockets for the receipt to try and decipher the name. It wasn't there. Perhaps she had taken it back while I was sleeping. I don't know how long I wandered thus, resting now in one place, now in another, in the city and in the country. The city had suffered many changes, nor was the country as I remembered it. The general effect was the same. One day I caught sight of my son. He was striding along with a briefcase under his arm. He took off his hat and bowed, and I saw he was as bald as a coot. I was almost certain it was he. I turned round to gaze after him. He went bustling along on his duck feet, bowing and scraping and flourishing his hat left and right. The insufferable son of a bitch. One day I met a man I had known in former times. He lived in a cave by the sea. He had an ass that grazed winter and summer over the cliffs or along the little tracks leading down to the sea. When the weather was very bad, this ass came down to the cave of his own accord and sheltered there till the storm was past. So they had spent many a night huddled together, while the wind howled and the sea pounded on the shore. With the help of this ass he could deliver sand, sea-wrack, and shells to the townsfolk for their gardens. He couldn't carry much at a time, for the ass was old and small and the town was far. But in this way he earned a little money, enough to keep him in tobacco and matches, and to buy a piece of bread from time to time. It was during one of these excursions that he met me in the suburbs. He was delighted to see me, poor man. He begged me to go home with him and spend the night. "Stay as long as you like," he said. "What's wrong with your ass?" I said. "Don't mind him," he said. "He doesn't know you." I reminded him that I wasn't in the habit of staying more than 2 or 3 minutes with anyone, and that the sea did not agree with me. He seemed deeply grieved to hear it. "So you won't come," he said. But to my amazement I got up on the ass and went off, in the shade of the red chestnuts springing from the sidewalk. I held the ass by the mane, one hand in front of the other. The little boys jeered and threw stones, but their aim was poor, for they only hit me once, on the hat. A policeman stopped us, and accused us of disturbing the peace. My friend replied that we were as nature had made us. The boys, too, were as nature had made them. It was inevitable, under these conditions, that the peace should be disturbed from time to time. "Let us continue on our way," he said, "and order will soon be restored throughout your beat." We followed the quiet, dust-white inland roads with their hedges of hawthorn and fuchsia, and their footpaths fringed with wild grass and daisies. Night fell. The ass carried me right to the mouth of the cave, for in the dark I could not have found my way down the path winding steeply to the sea. Then he climbed back to his pasture. I don't know how long I stayed there. The cave was nicely arranged, I must say. I treated my crab lice with salt water and seaweed, but a lot of nits must have survived. I put compresses of seaweed on my skull, which gave me great relief, but not for long. I lay in the cave and sometimes looked out at the horizon. I saw above me a vast, trembling expanse without islands or promontories. At night, a light shone into the cave at regular intervals. It was here I found the file in my pocket. It was not broken, for the glass was not real glass. I thought Mr. Weir had confiscated all my belongings. My host was out most of the time. He fed me on fish. It is easy for a proper man, to live in a cave far from everybody. He invited me to stay as long as I liked. If I preferred to be alone, he would gladly prepare another cave for me further on. He would bring me food every day and drop in from time to time to make sure I was all right and needed nothing. He was kind. Unfortunately, I did not need kindness. "You wouldn't know of a lake dwelling," I said. I couldn't bear the sea, its splashing and heaving, its tides and general convulsiveness. The wind at least sometimes stops. My hands and feet felt as though they were full of ants. This kept me awake for hours on end. If I stayed here, something awful would happen to me, I said, and a lot of good that would do me. "You'd get drowned," he said. "Yes," I said, "or jump off the cliff." "And to think I couldn't live anywhere else," he said. "In my cabin and in the mountains I was wretched." "Your cabin in the mountains?" I said. He repeated the story of his cabin in the mountains. I had forgotten it. It was as though I was hearing it for the first time. I asked him if he still had it. He replied he had not seen it since the day he fled from it, but that he believed it was still there, a little decayed, no doubt. But when he urged me to take the key, I refused, saying I had other plans. "You will always find me here," he said, "if you ever need me." Ah, people. He gave me his knife. What he called his cabin in the mountains was a sort of wooden shed. The door had been removed for firewood or for some other purpose. The glass had disappeared from the window. The roof had fallen in at several places. The interior was divided by the remains of a partition into two unequal parts. If there had been any furniture, it was gone. The vilest acts had been committed on the ground and against the walls. The floor was strewn with excrements, both human and animal, with condoms and vomit. In a cow pad a heart had been traced, pierced by an arrow, and yet there was nothing to attract tourists. I noticed the remains of abandoned nosegays. They had been greedily gathered, carried for miles, then thrown away because they were cumbersome or already withered. This was the dwelling to which I had been offered the key. The scene was the familiar one of grandeur and desolation. Nevertheless, it was a roof over my head. I rested on a bed of ferns, gathered at great labor with my own hands. One day I couldn't get up. The cow saved me. Goaded by the icy mist, she came in search of shelter. It was probably not the first time. She can't have seen me. I tried to suck her without much success. Her udder was covered with dung. I took off my hat and, summoning all my energy, began to milk her into it. The milk fell to the ground and was lost, but I said to myself, "No matter, it's free." She dragged me across the floor, stopping from time to time only to kick me. I didn't know our cows too could be so inhuman. She must have recently been milked. Clutching the dug with one hand, I kept my hat under it with the other, but in the end she prevailed, for she dragged me across the threshold and out into the giant streaming ferns, where I was forced to let go. As I drank the milk, I reproached myself with what I had done. I could no longer count on this cow, and she would warn the others. More master of myself, I might have made a friend of her. She would have come every day, perhaps accompanied by other cows. I might have learnt to make butter, even cheese, but I said to myself, no, all is for the best. Once on the road, it was all downhill. Soon there were carts, but they all refused to take me up. In other clothes, with another face, they might have taken me up. I must have changed since my expulsion from the basement. The face notably seemed to have attained its climacteric. The humble, ingenuous smile would no longer come, nor the expression of candid misery, showing the stars and the distaff. I summoned them, but they would not come. A mask of dirty, old, hairy leather, with 2 holes and a slit. It was too far gone for the old trick of please your honor and God reward you and pity upon me. It was disastrous. What would I crawl with in future? I lay down on the side of the road and began to writhe each time I heard a cart approaching. That was so they would not think I was sleeping or resting. I tried to groan, "Help! Help!" but the tone that came out was that of polite conversation. My hour was not yet come, and I could no longer groan. The last time I had cause to groan, I had groaned as well as ever, and no heart within miles of me to melt. What was to become of me? I said to myself, I'll learn again. I lay down across the road at a narrow place, so that the carts could not pass without passing over my body, with 1 wheel at least, or 2 if there were 4. But the day came when, looking round me, I was in the suburbs, and from there to the old haunts it was not far, beyond the stupid hope of rest or less pain. So I covered the lower part of my face with a black rag and went and begged at a sunny corner, for it seemed to me my eyes were not completely spent, thanks perhaps to the dark glasses my tutor had given me. He had given me the ethics of Gullinks. They were a man's glasses. I was a child. They found him dead, crumpled up in the water closet, his clothes in awful disorder, struck down by an infarctus. Ah, what peace! The ethics had his name, Ward, on the fly-leaf. The glasses had belonged to him. The bridge, at the time I am speaking of, was of brass wire, of the kind used to hang pictures in big mirrors, and 2 long black ribbons served as wings. I wound them round my ears, and then down under my chin, where I tied them together. The lenses had suffered from rubbing in my pocket against each other and against the other objects in there. I thought Mr. Weir had confiscated all my belongings, but I had no further need of these glasses, and used them merely to soften the glare of the sun. I should never have mentioned them. The rag gave me a lot of trouble. I got it in the end from the lining of my greatcoat. No, I had no greatcoat now. Of my coat then. The result was a grey rag rather than a black, perhaps even checkered, but I had to make do with it. Till afternoon I held my face raised towards the southern sky, then towards the western till night. The bowl gave me a lot of trouble. I couldn't use my hat because of my skull. As for holding out my hand, that was quite out of the question, so I got a tin and hung it from a button of my greatcoat. What's the matter with me? Of my coat, at pubis level. It did not hang plumb, it leaned respectfully towards the passer-by. He had only to drop his mite. But that obliged him to come up close to me. He was in danger of touching me. In the end I got a bigger tin, a kind of big tin box, and I placed it on the sidewalk at my feet. But people who give alms don't much care to toss them. There's something contemptuous about this gesture which is repugnant to sensitive natures. To say nothing of their having to aim. They are prepared to give, but not for their gift to go rolling under the passing feet, or under the passing wheels, to be picked up perhaps by some undeserving person. So they don't give. There are those, to be sure, who stoop, but generally speaking, people who give alms don't much care to stoop. What they like above all is to sight the wretch from afar, get ready their penny, drop it in their stride, and hear the God bless you dying away in the distance. Personally, I never said that, nor anything like it. I wasn't much of a believer, but I did make a noise with my mouth. In the end I got a kind of board or tray and tied it to my neck and waist. It jutted out just at the right height, pocket height, and its edge was far enough from my person for the coin to be bestowed without danger. Some days I strewed it with flowers, petals, buds, and that herb which men call fleabane, I believe, in a word, whatever I could find. I didn't go out of my way to look for them, but all the pretty things of this description that came my way were for the board. They must have thought I loved nature. Most of the time I looked up at the sky, but without focusing on it, for why focus it? Most of the time it was a mixture of white, blue, and gray, and then at evening all the evening colors. I felt it wane softly on my face. I rubbed my face against it, one cheek after the other, turning my head from side to side. Now and then, to rest my neck, I dropped my head on my chest. Then I could see the board in the distance, a haze of many colors. I leaned against the wall, but without nonchalance. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, and my hands clutched the lapels of my coat. To beg with your hands in your pockets makes a bad impression. It irritates the workers, especially in winter. You should never wear gloves, either. There were gutter snipes who swept away all I had earned, under cover of giving me a coin. It was to buy sweets. I unbuttoned my trousers discreetly to scratch myself. I scratched myself in an upward direction with 4 nails. I pulled on the hairs to get relief. It passed the time. Time flew when I scratched myself. Real scratching is superior to masturbation, in my opinion. One can masturbate up to the age of 70, and even beyond, but in the end it becomes a mere habit. Whereas to scratch myself properly I would have needed a dozen hands. I itched all over, on the privates, in the bush up to the navel, under the arms, in the arse, and then patches of eczema and psoriasis that I could set raging merely by thinking of them. It was in the arse I had the most pleasure. I stuck my forefinger up to the knuckle. Later, if I had to shit, the pain was atrocious, but I hardly shat any more. Now and then a flying machine flew by, sluggishly it seemed to me. Often at the end of the day I discovered the legs of my trousers all wet. That must have been the dogs. I personally pissed very little. If by chance the need came on me, a little squirt in my fly was enough to relieve it. Once at my post I did not leave it till nightfall. I had no appetite. God tempered the wind to me. After work I bought a bottle of milk and drank it in the evening in the shed. Better still, I got a little boy to buy it for me. Always the same. They wouldn't serve me. I don't know why. I gave him a penny for his pains. One day I witnessed a strange scene. Normally I didn't see a great deal. I didn't hear a great deal either. I didn't pay attention. Strictly speaking, I wasn't there. Strictly speaking, I believe I've never been anywhere. But that day I must have come back. For some time past a sound had been scarifying me. I did not investigate the cause, for I said to myself, it's going to stop. But as it did not stop, I had no choice but to find out the cause. It was a man perched on the roof of a car and haranguing the passers-by. That at least was my interpretation. He was bellowing so loud that snatches of his discourse reached my ears. Union, brothers, Marx, capital, bread and butter, love. It was all Greek to me. The car was drawn up against the curb. Just in front of me, I saw the orator from behind. All of a sudden he turned and pointed at me, as at an exhibit. Look at this down and out, he vociferated, this leftover. If he doesn't go down on all fours, it's for fear of being impounded. Old, lousy, rotten, ripe for the muck heap. And there are 1,000 like him, worse than him, 10,000, 20,000. A voice. 30,000. Every day you pass by them, resumed the orator, and when you have backed a winner, you fling them a farthing. Do you ever think? The voice. God forbid. A penny, resumed the orator. 2 pence. The voice. Threepence. It never enters your head, resumed the orator, that your charity is a crime, an incentive to slavery, stultification, and organized murder. Take a good look at this living corpse. You may say it's his own fault. Ask him if it's his own fault. The voice. Ask him yourself. Then he bent forward and took me to task. I had perfected my board. It now consisted of 2 boards hinged together, which enabled me, when my work was done, to fold it and carry it under my arm. I liked doing little odd jobs, so I took off the rag, pocketed the few coins I had earned, untied the board, folded it, and put it under my arm. Do you hear me, you crucified bastard? Cried the orator. Then I went away, although it was still light. But generally speaking, it was a quiet corner, busy but not overcrowded, thriving and well frequented. He must have been a religious fanatic. I could find no other explanation. Perhaps he was an escaped lunatic. He had a nice face, a little on the red side. I did not work every day. I had practically no expenses. I even managed to put a little aside for my very last days. The days I did not work I spent lying in the shed. The shed was on a private estate, or what had once been a private estate, on the riverside. This estate, the main entrance to which opened on a narrow, dark, and silent street, was enclosed with a wall, except of course on the riverfront, which marked its northern boundary for a distance of about 30 yards. From the last quays beyond the water, the eyes rose to a confusion of low houses, wasteland, hoardings, chimneys, steeples, and towers. A kind of parade ground was also to be seen, where soldiers played football all the year round. Only the ground floor windows. No, I can't. The estate seemed abandoned. The gates were locked and the paths were overgrown with grass. Only the ground floor windows had shutters. The others were sometimes lit at night, faintly, now one, now another. At least that was my impression. Perhaps it was reflected light. In this shed, the day I adopted it, I found a boat, upside down. I righted it, chalked it up with stones and pieces of wood, took out the thwarts, and made my bed inside. The rats had difficulty in getting at me, because of the bulge of the hull. And yet they longed to. Just think of it, living flesh, for in spite of everything, I was still living flesh. I had lived too long among rats, in my chance dwellings, to share the dread they inspire in the vulgar. I even had a soft spot in my heart for them. They came with such confidence towards me, it seemed without the least repugnance. They made their toilet with cat-like gestures. Toads at evening, motionless for hours, lap flies from the air. They like to squat where cover ends and open air begins. They favor thresholds. But I had to contend now with water rats. exceptionally lean and ferocious. So I made a kind of lid with stray boards. It's incredible the number of boards I've come across in my lifetime. I never needed a board, but there it was. I had only to stoop and pick it up. I liked doing little odd jobs. No, not particularly. I didn't mind. It completely covered the boat. I'm referring again to the lid. I pushed it a little towards the stern, climbed into the boat by the bow, crawled to the stern, raised my feet, and pushed the lid back towards the bow till it covered me completely. But what did my feet push against? They pushed against a crossbar I nailed to the lid for that purpose. I liked these little odd jobs. But it was better to climb into the boat by the stern and pull back the lid with my hands till it completely covered me, then push it forward in the same way when I wanted to get out. As holds for my hands, I planted 2 spikes just where I needed them. These little odds and ends of carpentry, if I may so describe it, carried out with whatever tools and materials I chanced to find, gave me a certain pleasure. I knew it would soon be the end, so I played the part, the part of, how shall I say, I don't know. I was comfortable enough in this boat, I must say. The lid fitted so well I had to pierce a hole. It's no good closing your eyes. You must leave them open in the dark, that is my opinion. I'm not speaking of sleep, I'm speaking of what I believe is called waking. In any case, I slept very little at this period. I wasn't sleepy, or I was too sleepy, I don't know, or I was afraid, I don't know. Flat then, on my back, I saw nothing except, dimly, just above my head, through the tiny chinks, the grey light of the shed. To see nothing at all, no, that's too much. I heard faintly the cries of the gulls, ravening about the mouth of the sewer nearby, and a spew of yellow foam, if my memory serves me right. The filth gushed into the river, and the slush of birds above screaming with hunger and fury. I heard the lapping of water against the slip, and against the bank, and the other sound, so different, of open wave, I heard it too. I too, when I moved, felt less boat than wave, or so it seemed to me, and my stillness was the stillness of eddies. That may seem impossible. The rain, too, I often heard it, for it often rained. Sometimes a drop, falling through the roof of the shed, exploded on me. All that composed a rather liquid world. And then, of course, there was the voice of the wind, or rather those, so various, of its playthings. But what does it amount to? Howling, soughing, moaning, sighing. What I would have liked was hammer strokes. Bang, 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 clanging in the desert. I let farts, to be sure, but hardly ever a real crack. They oozed out with a sucking noise, melted in the mighty never. I don't know how long I stayed there. I was very snug in my box, I must say. It seemed to me I had grown more independent of recent years, that no one came any more, that no one could come any more to ask me if I was all right and needed nothing. Distressed me then but little. I was all right, yes, quite so, and the fear of getting worse was less with me. As for my needs, they had dwindled, as it were, to my dimensions, and become, if I may say so, of so exquisite a quality as to exclude all thought of succour. To know I had a being, however faint and false, outside of me, had once had the power to stir my heart. You become unsociable, it's inevitable. It's enough to make you wonder sometimes if you are on the right planet. Even the words desert you, it's as bad as that. Perhaps it's the moment when the vessels stop communicating, the vessels. There you are, still between the 2 murmurs. It must be the same old song as ever, but Christ, you wouldn't think so. There were times when I wanted to push away the lid and get out of the boat and couldn't. I was so indolent and weak, so content deep down where I was. I felt them hard upon me, the icy, tumultuous streets, the terrifying faces, the noises that slash, pierce, claw, bruise. So I waited till the desire to shit, or even to piss, lent me wings. I did not want to dirty my nest, and yet it sometimes happened, even more and more often. Arched and rigid, I edged down my trousers and turned a little on my side, just enough to free the whole. To contrive a little kingdom, in the midst of the universal muck, then shit on it, that was me all over. The excrements were me too, I know, but all the same. Enough. The next thing, I was having visions. I who never did, except sometimes in my sleep, who never had real visions I'd remember, except perhaps as a child, my myth will have it so. I knew they were visions because it was night and I was alone in my boat. What else could they have been? So I was in my boat gliding on the waters. I didn't have to row, the ebb was carrying me out. Anyway, I saw no oars, they must have taken them away. I had a board, the remains of a thwart perhaps, which I used when I came too close to the bank, or when a pier came bearing down on me, or a barge at its moorings. There were stars in the sky, quite a few. I didn't know what the weather was doing. I was neither cold nor warm, and all seemed calm. The banks receded more and more. It was inevitable. Soon I saw them no more. The lights grew fainter and fewer as the river widened. There on the land men were sleeping. Bodies were gathering strength for the toil and joys of the morrow. The boat was not gliding now, it was tossing, buffeted by the choppy waters of the bay. All seemed calm, and yet foam was washing aboard. Now the sea air was all about me. I had no other shelter than the land. And what does it amount to, the shelter of the land, at such a time? I saw the beacons, 4 in all, including a lightship. I knew them well, even as a child I had known them well. It was evening. I was with my father on a height. He held my hand. I would have liked him to draw me close with a gesture of protective love, but his mind was on other things. He also taught me the names of the mountains. But to have done with these visions, I also saw the lights of the buoys. The sea seemed full of them, red and green, and to my surprise even yellow. And on the slopes of the mountain, now rearing its unbroken bulk behind the town, the fires turned from gold to red, from red to gold. I knew what it was. It was the gorse burning. How often I had set a match to it myself as a child. And hours later, back in my home, before I climbed into bed, I watched from my high window the fires I had lit. That night then, all aglow with distant fires, on the sea, on land, and in the sky, I drifted with the currents and the tides. I noticed that my hat was tied, with a string, I suppose, to my buttonhole. I got up from my seat in the stern, and a great clanking was heard. That was the chain. One end was fastened to the bow, and the other round my waist. I must have pierced a hole beforehand in the floorboards, for there I was, down on my knees, prying out the plug with my knife. The hole was small, and the water rose slowly. It would take a good half-hour, everything included, barring accidents. Back now in the stern sheets, my legs stretched out, my back well propped against the sack stuffed with grass I used as a cushion, I swallowed my culminative. The sea, the sky, the mountains and the islands closed in and crushed me in a mighty systole, then scattered to the uttermost confines of space. The memory came faint and cold of the story I might have told. A story in the likeness of my life. I mean, without the courage to end or the strength to go on.